Ruben, is the Catholic Church the first church? And why have they taken a superior lead over every other church? For example, I was asked by a little boy who happened to be a Catholic server. It's like the people who help the priest in the
Yeah.
church. He said they have the authority above every other church because they lead and dictate when other churches celebrate, for example, Easter. So it's only the Catholic Church who brings out the date for Easter. And more to say, he's adding the proof to this because he's beginning to see Pentecostal churches make use of the, I think they call it chasuble, which is the cloth to the Reverend
Exactly.
Fathers, which was not a tradition of the Pentecostal churches before. Is the Catholic Church really the first church? Are they the ones to take? Are they really taking the lead above every other church? Are they? I mean, they've got so much power, but are they really the first church? Is it seen as though that they are the first church? Which back it up with the scripture. This says Peter was told that God told Peter that on this rock you will build my church in Antioch. Because that church was Catholic. So what do you have to say about that?
It wasn't in Antioch. It was in Caesarea Philippi after the apostles realised who Jesus was. So that we've got in Scripture. That's Peter. There is a lot of history tied up in all this. The Catholic Church has a lot of power where it has, and there's a lot of places in the world where the Catholic Church does not have a say in these things. The whole of the Orthodox community is just as ancient as the Catholic Church. So we're talking about the Coptic Church, the Ethiopic Church, we're talking about the church in Russia, the Orthodox Church in these places is the biggest church. And these churches, their history goes all the way back into the origins of Christianity. And it's a matter for me of some debate as whether Rome was planted first as a church. The first church is Jerusalem. Admittedly, the church in Jerusalem no longer exists as an entity as such, but Jerusalem was one of the most important churches. They were the first sending church. He actually started churches through the work of the apostles, the people scattered from persecution in Damascus. So the Syrian Orthodox Church could argue that it predates Rome. In Alexandria, really close by, that's the church that Mark went to when he left Rome. He went to Alexandria, which was already established, and there he wrote what Peter had been preaching over in Rome, which means that the Coptic Church predates Rome. As the organisation of the church developed, you basically had 4 different centres. There was this in the early church, Constantine, and to some extent post-Constantine as well. You had Antioch and at times Aleppo. They were the 2 churches in the Syrian area. You had another church in Turkey, which eventually ended up being centred in Istanbul, Constantinople. And then you had Rome. 4 churches, all with authority over the churches in their area, all centred on an archbishop, quotes Pope, so that each had their own key leader. And Pope is just another word for overseer. So you had all of these churches, and the most uncomfortable thing about the early church is that Rome kept on saying, we've got the right to rule over you. And the other churches said, no, you don't. You got tension developing. Some of the arguments that Rome has seem very persuasive, but actually, where did Peter go before he went to Rome? He went to other places. He did things in other places. He spread the gospel elsewhere. Why is Rome claiming to be the first? Everything starts with Peter for us. But Peter's the rock for the whole church, not just one church. That Jesus doesn't say it's on this rock that I will build Rome, on this rock I will build my church. Peter is the key figure in the apostolic group, but all the apostles are going and doing their stuff and building the church. But Peter is the central figure in all of that happening. So you could argue that every church, every early church, had Peter as the rock, not just Rome. So there's a lot of debate about this one. Look, I come from a nonconformist background. I'm very sympathetic to the traditional churches, but I rest absolutely everything on this book. And I see absolutely no justification for one church in one part of the world saying to a church in another part of the world, I'm better than you. Quite the reverse. If someone is being Christian, they go to another church and say, how can I serve you? Not how can I rule you? That's the Christian message. And that should be how we mark how people behave. We were having a little discussion before we started these series of questions about churches in other parts of the world. My just sense of wariness and carefulness that what I'm doing here doesn't become something that starts to control what's happening anywhere else. I want to be able to serve people and help people. I don't want to be anybody important. It's not in my Christian DNA to try and be a power or an influence. Quite the reverse. God's called me to serve. Yeah. That should be our approach to serve. I mean, what we were saying just now in answer to another question about what our Jesus did. Jesus gave up all power and authority and all glory to be born a baby. That's what we remember at Christmas time. Shouldn't the churches behave like that? They should if they're calling themselves Christian. So that leads us to question a lot of the stuff that we're told and a lot of the things that we debate. I happen to have studied quite a reasonable amount the early church development. You don't see Rome being an important figure, apart from in the area that they have responsibility for. That's enough of that. Yeah.